Welcome back. Every profession has its rulebook, and AI just spent the last few years acquiring one at record speed. This chapter is your tour of the regulatory and ethical landscape, and I'll be honest, it's one of the most exam dense chapters in this entire course, so pour the coffee and settle in. Here are our focus areas. First, the heavyweight, the EU AI Act, its risk pyramid, prohibited practices, high risk obligations, and crucially for us, what an auditor actually looks for when testing compliance against it. Second, the privacy neighbors, GDPR and DPIAs. Connecting back to last chapter, plus India's DPDP Act 2023, which many of you will be working with directly. Third, the voluntary frameworks that are rapidly becoming mandatory in practice. ISO 42001 for AI management systems and the NIST AI risk management framework with its four functions: govern, map, measure, manage. Fourth, sector-specific rules. SR 11-7 for banking model risk, FDA for medical AI, EEOC for employment, HIPAA for health data. And finally, ethics, the principles of fairness, transparency, accountability, safety and privacy, human oversight and contestability, ISACA's own code of ethics, ethics review boards, fairness KPIs, and what to do when ethical values collide. Regulations change, so I'll teach you the durable structures and the auditor's method for staying current. Subscribe because this is the chapter you'll re-watch before exam day. Let's hit the road. Let's start with the law everyone's watching, the EU AI Act, the world's first comprehensive AI regulation. Even if you never set foot in Europe, it matters because like GDPR before it, it reaches any organization whose AI touches the EU market. And it's becoming the template other regulators copy. The Act's genius is its structure, a risk pyramid. Instead of regulating AI as one thing, it sorts systems by the risk they pose and scales obligations accordingly. Picture four levels. At the top, unacceptable risk, practices banned outright. Below that, high risk, permitted but heavily regulated. Then limited risk, mainly transparency duties. And at the base, minimal risk, most AI largely untouched. One technology, four regulatory experiences, depending entirely on use. Recognize the philosophy? It's our use case risk assessment from Chapter 7, written into law. The prohibited tiers worth knowing almost by heart. Banned practices include social scoring by public authorities, AI that manipulates people through subliminal techniques or exploits vulnerabilities causing harm, untargeted scraping of facial images to build recognition databases, emotion recognition in workplaces and schools with narrow exceptions, and real-time remote biometric identification in public spaces by law enforcement, again with tightly drawn exceptions. When a client's roadmap brushes against any of these, the conversation isn't about controls, it's about stopping. The high-risk tier is where auditors will live. It covers AI in areas like biometrics, critical infrastructure, education, employment and worker management, essential services and credit, law enforcement, migration, and justice. For these systems, providers face a stack of obligations: a risk management system across the lifecycle, data governance and quality requirements, technical documentation, record keeping and logging, transparency to users, human oversight, accuracy, robustness, and cybersecurity, plus conformity assessment before market entry. Read that list again slowly. It's practically the table of contents of this course. And yes, penalties have teeth, reaching into the tens of millions of euros or a percentage of global turnover. Next lesson, we turn this legal structure into an audit program. Last lesson gave us the law. Now let's do what auditors do: convert legislation into evidence requests. If your organization or client claims EU AI Act readiness, here's how you test that claim, step by step. Step 1. Classification. Everything in this act flows from where a system sits on the risk pyramid, so audit the sorting first. Does an AI inventory exist? Is every system classified against the Act's categories? And is the reasoning documented? Watch for motivated classification, the mysterious pattern where systems cluster just below the high-risk line. Pick a few borderline cases, an HR screening tool, a credit-adjacent scoring system, and independently reason through the classification. Misclassification at this step silently voids everything downstream. Step 2. Role determination. The Act assigns different duties to providers who develop systems and deployers who use them, plus importers and distributors. Organizations are often both, provider of one system, deployer of 5 others. Has each role been identified per system? A company using a vendor's high-risk AI still carries deployer obligations, using it per instructions, ensuring human oversight, monitoring operation, and it can't outsource those away. Step 3. The high-risk evidence stack. For each high-risk system, request the artifacts the Act effectively mandates. The risk management file, living, not one time. Data governance documentation, training data quality, relevance and bias examination. Sound familiar from our data chapters? Technical documentation sufficient for authorities to assess compliance. Automatic logging capability and retained logs. Instructions for use and transparency materials. The human oversight design with our meaningful versus decorative test from Article 22 applying beautifully here. Accuracy and robustness testing evidence, and the conformity assessment record with registration where required. Step 4. The horizon check. Obligations phase in over time, prohibitions first, then governance rules for general purpose models, then the full high-risk regime. Does compliance planning map to those dates with owners and budgets? Here's the meta skill. Notice we never audited ethics or good intentions. We audited artifacts, dates, and signatures. That's how principles become findings. We covered GDPR's mechanics through an AI lens last chapter. So today, let's position it alongside the AI Act, then bring the story home to India. Because the DPDP Act is reshaping how every organization here handles personal data, AI included. First, how GDPR and the AI Act interlock. Think of them as two regulators standing on either side of the same system. GDPR governs the personal data flowing through the AI, lawful basis, purpose, limitation, rights, DPIAs. The AI Act governs the system itself, its risk class, documentation, oversight, robustness. One system, two compliance conversations. And here's the practical audit point. The artifacts overlap but don't substitute. A DPIA doesn't satisfy the AI Act's risk management file, and conformity documentation doesn't establish a lawful basis. Mature organizations run the assessments together, mapping shared evidence. Immature ones do one and waive it at both. Now, India. The Digital Personal Data Protection Act 2023 establishes a comprehensive privacy regime built around data fiduciaries, that's the organizations determining purposes, and data principals, the individuals. The load-bearing concepts, consent must be free, specific, informed, and unambiguous, with notice in plain language, and legitimate users provide limited non-consent grounds. Principals get rights to access, correction, erasure, and grievance redressal. Significant data fiduciaries, designated by scale and risk, carry extra duties: data protection officers, independent audits, and periodic impact assessments. Penalties scale into the hundreds of crores, so boards are paying attention. For AI specifically, notice what DPDPA's consent-centric design implies. Training models on personal data collected for other purposes runs into the same repurposing wall we studied under GDPR, arguably harder given consent's centrality here. Erasure rights meet the machine unlearning problem all over again. And for the many Indian firms processing global data, GDPR, DPDPA, and the AI Act stack, 3 rulebooks, 1 system. From laws, we move to standards, and the flagship here is ISO/IEC 42001, the world's first certifiable standard for AI management systems. If your organization holds ISO 27001, the shape of this will feel familiar, and that familiarity is exactly the point. Let's decode the idea. ISO 42001 doesn't certify that a model is accurate or fair. It certifies that the organization runs a management system for AI, an AIMS, a structured, repeatable way of governing AI across its life cycle. Same philosophy as 27001 for security or 9001 for quality. We're not inspecting every product, we're inspecting the factory's discipline. The standard follows the harmonized structure, context of the organization, leadership commitment, planning, support, operation, performance evaluation, and improvement. The classic plan, do, check, act loop, now wrapped around AI. What makes it AI specific lives in its themes and controls. Expect requirements around AI policy and roles. Remember our governance chapters. AI risk assessment and, distinctively, AI system impact assessment, looking outward at effects on individuals and society, not just inward at organizational risk. Lifecycle controls covering data quality, documentation, verification and validation, deployment, monitoring, and incident handling. Third-party and supply chain considerations are vendor chapter formalized. In short, if you followed this course from chapter 5 onward, you've been unknowingly touring an AIMS the whole time. Why does certification matter commercially? Because it's becoming the trust shorthand. Procurement teams that once asked for SOC 2 now add 42001 to vendor questionnaires, and remember our vendor due diligence lesson. Certification is one of the strongest assurance artifacts a vendor can offer. Expect regulators to treat it as evidence of seriousness too, helpful though never a legal safe harbor. For auditors, two roles emerge. You might audit against 42001. Internal audits are required by the standard itself, or you might assess certification readiness. Either way, the method is the one you know. Walk the clauses, demand evidence, test that the loop actually loops. A management system that never found its own non-conformities isn't mature, it's unexamined. Alongside ISO's certifiable standard sits America's contribution, the NIST AI Risk Management Framework. And if 42001 is a factory certification, the NIST AI RMF is a thinking toolkit, voluntary, flexible, and enormously influential. Regulators quote it, frameworks borrow from it, and the AAIA expects you to know its 4 functions cold. So let's learn them properly. The framework's goal is cultivating trustworthy AI, and it defines what trustworthy means. Systems that are valid and reliable, safe, secure and resilient, accountable and transparent, explainable and interpretable, privacy enhanced, and fair with harmful bias managed. Keep that list handy. It's essentially the quality criteria for everything we audit. Now the 4 functions. Govern is the foundation, and tellingly, it's cross-cutting, feeding the other 3. It covers culture, policies, accountability structures, workforce competence, everything our governance chapters built. NIST's message is blunt. Without governance, the rest is technique without authority. MAP is about context. Before measuring anything, understand the system's purpose, its users, its deployment environment, who could be affected, and what could go wrong. Sound familiar? It's our use case risk assessment and threat modeling given a formal home. Mapping is where organizations discover that the same model in a new context is a new risk. Measure turns mapped risks into evidence, quantitative and qualitative. Test accuracy, fairness metrics, robustness, privacy leakage, track them over time, remember drift, and crucially, assess whether your measurements themselves are any good. Unmeasured trustworthiness is a rumor. Manage closes the loop. Prioritize the measured risks. Treat them, avoid, reduce, transfer, accept, straight from Chapter 7. Respond to incidents and feed lessons back into governance. See the elegant circle? Govern sets authority, map finds risk, measure evidences it, manage, acts on it, and back around. For your audits, the RMF makes a superb interview skeleton. Ask a team to describe their practices against each function, and gaps announce themselves. And on the exam, when a scenario asks where an activity belongs, think authority, context, evidence, or action. That's govern, map, measure, manage in 4 words. General frameworks give us the skeleton, but real audits happen inside industries, and industries bring their own rule books. Today, 4 you must recognize on sight. Banking's SR 11-7, medical AI under the FDA, employment AI under the EEOC, and health data under HIPAA. Think of this as your sector phrasebook. Start with banking, SR 11-7, the US Federal Reserve's supervisory guidance on model risk management. And here's the fun fact, it predates the AI boom by over a decade. Banks have been governing models since before it was cool, and the guidance shows it. Its pillars: sound model development with documentation, independent validation, that phrase matters, validators organizationally separate from developers, and governance with inventories, policies, and clear ownership. It also gave our profession the concept of effective challenge, qualified, empowered people critically examining models. When you audit AI in financial services, SR 11-7 thinking is the house style. And honestly, its disciplines transfer beautifully everywhere else. Healthcare next. 2 distinct regimes. The FDA regulates AI that functions as a medical device. Software as a medical device. Think diagnostic imaging AI or triage algorithms. The regulatory puzzle is that FDA approval traditionally freezes a product, while AI wants to learn and update. So the FDA developed approaches like predetermined change control plans, pre-approving the envelope within which a model may evolve. Auditors here verify the deployed model stays inside its approved envelope. HIPAA, meanwhile, governs the data side. Protected health information feeding AI requires safeguards, minimum necessary use, and business associate agreements when vendors touch it. Connect that straight to our vendor and privacy chapters. Finally, employment. The EEOC enforces anti-discrimination law, and it has made clear that algorithmic hiring and promotion tools sit squarely under existing rules. Disparate impact doctrine applies whether a human or a model rejected the candidate. Employers can't outsource liability to their AI vendor either, and local rules are emerging, like New York City's law requiring bias audits of automated employment decision tools. Yes, mandated algorithm audits, our profession written into statute. The pattern to carry. Sector rules don't replace the general frameworks, they sharpen them where harm is most concentrated. In any engagement, ask early, which regulator already cares about this decision? Someone usually does. We've toured laws and standards. Now let's step beneath them. Because every framework we've studied is scaffolding around the same 5 ethical principles: fairness, transparency, accountability, safety, and privacy. Learn these deeply, and every regulation becomes recognizable. They're the melody every rulebook plays in its own arrangement. Fairness first. An AI system is fair when it doesn't create unjustified disadvantage for individuals or groups. Simple to say, genuinely hard to operationalize. Because fairness has competing mathematical definitions. Should the model make errors at equal rates across groups, or give equal outcomes, or treat identical profiles identically? These can be mutually exclusive. Choosing between them is an ethical decision wearing a technical costume. And we'll spend serious time on fairness metrics in the testing chapter. For now, hold this. Fairness is a choice someone must make explicitly and document. Silence means the training data chose. Transparency means appropriate openness about the system, that AI is being used, how it broadly works, what data feeds it. Its close cousin, explainability, remember our black box chapter, addresses individual decisions. The audit question: could an affected person find out what they'd reasonably want to know? Accountability is our oldest friend by now. a named human answerable for outcomes, with authority and evidence trails. Everything chapters 5 and 6 built. No principle survives without this one. Unfair, opaque, unsafe systems persist precisely when nobody owns them. Safety means the system doesn't cause harm, physical, financial, psychological, and remains robust under stress, edge cases, adversarial inputs, drift. Note how safety expands with capability. A chatbot advising on medications carries safety stakes its designers may never have contemplated. And privacy, the whole of Chapter 8 distilled. Personal data handled lawfully, minimally, and securely across the AI lifecycle. Here's the exam-ready insight. These 5 principles trade off against each other constantly. Transparency can strain privacy. Publishing model details can expose training data. Fairness interventions can reduce accuracy, touching safety. The mark of mature ethics isn't reciting principles, it's evidencing how conflicts between them get decided and by whom. Hold that thought because it's exactly where this chapter is heading. Principles need humans to carry them. So today we cover the human machinery of AI ethics, oversight roles, the right to contest, and the professional code that binds you personally as an ISACA certified auditor. Human oversight first, and let's give the exam its vocabulary. Human in the loop means a person actively participates in each decision the model recommends, the human decides. Human on the loop means the system decides autonomously while a person monitors and can intervene. Human in command means humans retain overall authority over whether and how the system operates at all, including switching it off. Which mode fits which situation? Stakes decide. Medical diagnoses and loan denials warrant in-the-loop involvement. Fraud blocking at transaction speed may only allow on-the-loop supervision with strong monitoring. And everything requires in-command authority somewhere. Remember our kill switch discussions. And carry forward our recurring test. Oversight must be meaningful. A reviewer with no time, no training, no authority, and a 99% approval habit is furniture, whatever the org chart says. We'll dedicate a full lesson to auditing oversight theatre in Chapter 13. Contestability is oversight's public-facing twin, the affected person's ability to challenge a decision and reach reconsideration by someone with authority to change it. Article 22 made this legal in Europe, but treat it as an ethical baseline everywhere. The audit evidence is concrete, a visible channel, cases actually processed, and at least occasionally decisions overturned. A contest process that has never changed an outcome deserves your suspicion. Now, ISACA's Code of Professional Ethics, and this one is personal. It binds you as a certification holder. Its commitments, in plain words, support standards and procedures for governance and management of information systems. Perform duties with objectivity, due diligence, and professional care. Serve stakeholders lawfully while maintaining high standards of conduct. Maintain confidentiality of information obtained in your work. Maintain competency and inform appropriate parties of results, disclosing what needs disclosing. Violations can cost you the credential you're studying so hard for. Here's how it all connects. When you audit whether a client's human oversight is real, you are exercising objectivity and due care. Ethics stays theoretical until an organization builds machinery for it. Today, two pieces of that machinery, the Ethics Review Board that deliberates before harm and the Fairness KPIs that watch for it continuously. Together, they answer the skeptic's question, what does operationalized ethics actually look like? Ethics Review Boards first. We met them briefly in the governance chapters, now let's give them substance. A functioning board reviews AI use cases against the organization's principles, especially where law is silent but harm is possible. Remember, a hiring tool can be perfectly legal and still indefensible. Composition determines credibility. You want diversity of discipline, technologists, legal, ethics, or social science expertise, business owners, and ideally, voices representing affected communities, sometimes external members, precisely because insiders share blind spots. Authority determines relevance. Can the board require changes, impose conditions, or veto, and where do its decisions bind? And process determines quality. Structured case submissions, documented deliberations, tracked conditions. Your audit test should feel familiar by now. Request the charter, sample the minutes, count the rejections and conditions, and trace 3 imposed conditions to closure. A board that has only ever blessed things is a chapel, not a checkpoint. Now, fairness KP is the continuous counterpart. Deliberation happens occasionally, but models decide daily. So, mature organizations wire fairness into their metrics layer, straight back to our KPI and KRI lesson. Practical examples: approval or selection rates compared across demographic groups, error rates, those false positives and negatives, broken down by segment. Remember, harm hides in the boxes. Override and complaint rates by group, and drift in any of these over time. Each metric gets a threshold, an owner, and an escalation path. Breach the fairness band, and someone's phone rings, ideally before a journalist's does. Two audit subtleties here. First, measuring fairness often requires demographic data, which collides with privacy and, in some jurisdictions, legal limits. Ask how the organization solved that tension: proxies, inference, voluntary disclosure, and whether legal reviewed it. Second, check the metrics reach decision makers. A fairness dashboard viewed only by data scientists is a diary, not a control. Boards for judgment, KP is for vigilance. When you find both, connected and evidenced, you found ethics with a pulse. We end this chapter where real ethical maturity lives: in conflict. Because the hard moments aren't when an organization must choose between right and wrong. Those are easy to narrate. The hard moments are right versus right, when two values you genuinely hold pull in opposite directions. Let's learn how organizations and auditors navigate that. Feel the tension through examples: accuracy versus fairness. Adjusting a lending model to equalize outcomes across groups may lower overall predictive accuracy. Who decides how much, and on what authority? Transparency versus privacy. Explaining decisions in detail can expose training data or enable gaming. Remember membership inference. Safety versus autonomy. A wellness app detecting crisis signals could alert someone and save a life, or violate the very confidentiality that made users honest. Innovation versus caution. Delaying a diagnostic AI for more testing protects against model errors while patients miss earlier detection. Notice something? In every case, both sides are defensible, which means the decision cannot be delegated to a policy sentence. It needs a process. A credible decision framework has recognizable bones. First, surface the conflict explicitly. Name both values, forcing the trade-off out of engineers' implicit choices and into the open. Second, gather structured input: ethics board review, impacted stakeholder perspectives, legal floor setting. Law is the minimum, not the answer. Third, decide at the right altitude. The more consequential and value-laden the trade-off, the more senior and accountable the decider. Some calls belong to the executive committee or board, not a sprint meeting. Fourth, document the reasoning: what was weighed, what was chosen, why, and what conditions attach. And fifth, revisit. Trade-offs decided under last year's assumptions deserve review dates. Escalation deserves its own word. Every framework needs a path for the person who disagrees: the data scientist troubled by a launch, the reviewer seeing patterned harm. Clear escalation routes, protection from retaliation, and evidence the route has actually been used. An escalation channel with zero traffic in 3 years is either a perfect organization or a silent one, and you know which is more common. And your role? Auditors don't make these value choices. We verify they were made properly, explicitly, at the right level, with reasoning on record. Process is what we audit. Wisdom is what we hope the process produces. That's the rulebook chapter complete. Next, we descend from principles back into the machinery, the data behind the model, quality, lineage, and bias. See you in Chapter 10.